So we welcome and we're very honored to have these three prestigious participants today to discuss our panel theme. And we heard several important things this morning already from the under and from the Chief Learning Officer, but I thought I'd dive in on a couple other aspects, sometimes on the same theme, maybe go a little deeper, because the people on this stage are the people who in many cases are going to make it happen. So one of the things that came up this morning is SecNav directed that learning as a desired warfighting trait become a separate graded category in officer fitness reports and enlisted evaluations. And this is not going to be implemented until 2020. But in the meantime, I thought I would ask you each to say, from your respective institutional perspectives, what are some of the things that you could be doing in the future that might contribute to this? I have many questions about it. Is it going to be graded in residence? Is it just going to be open external courses? Is it just going to be a judgment of your superior? But for each of you, there's going to be a contribution. And I'll start on the far side with Admiral Rondeau.
Well, first of all, thank you, Pete, for this really important process of learning about what we're doing. And it's great to see a number of people out here in the audience. I'm somewhat daunted because the number of you wrote my fitness reports over time. So hopefully we'll stand by here. So at PG school, at Naval Postgraduate School, we're the only place on the globe, and certainly in the United States, that awards STEM, S&T, master's and PhD degrees for warfighter and warfighter enablers. So our job is to be responsive to fleet needs. Our curriculum get reviewed every 2 years by sponsors. We have dialogues with the fleet constantly. And the sponsors, the folks who pay us, get a chance to ask us and tell us what it is they have for their requirements. So for our in-residence schools, for our DL courses, and for all those things, we have sponsors to whom we are accountable. Number two is our students do theses, and the theses are based upon applied science and applied knowledge to whatever kind of warfighting problem that the student or the sponsor or the service might ask us then to answer. So we have a measurable product that measures that kind of knowledge and the relevance. And three is, and it gets to something that John Kroger said earlier, accreditors in their accreditation process will ask you, are you fulfilling your mission needs? Are you doing what your mission says is the case? And if you have a good dialogue with the accreditor, that gives you a chance to self-assess if that's the case. So we have a number of ways that we're doing that. We can talk about other parts of it, but for accountability to warfighters, we're doing that. We're changing constantly because the warfighter needs change constantly.
Thank you. General Bargeron, would you like to take
that up? Thanks for having me here, and thank you all for being here. I do want to say that I think you said Naval War College, and I don't want to get charged with false, advertisement here. I went to the National War College, and okay. Admiral Rondeau signed my certificate. So I want to make sure that
I stand corrected.
Yeah, nobody here. I don't want to claim something I haven't earned in this crowd. So I can talk specifically about what our sort of initial thoughts here and where we are with trying to grade, learning as a warfighting trait. On our current fitness reports, our existing fitness reports for lieutenant colonels and below, both officer and enlisted, there are 14 traits that Marines are, or that they're evaluated in. And one of them is PME, and that is their commitment to self-learning, to lifelong learning, to both their resident and non-resident and personal study as demonstrated to their commanding officer. It also takes into account personal qualifications and certifications. The low end of the scale is like maintains currency. The high end of the scale is dedicated to lifelong learning, are the words that are on the paper there. So we are doing that now. What the Commandant has charged me to do, though, is take it a step further and develop a separate fitness report that would be used, an academic fitness report that would be used during the academic year when you are at a resident PME course, a formal PME course. The challenge we're going to have with that is integrating profiles. As a reporting senior, I have a profile that I've used, that I've written on officers for 20 or 30 years, and it's been in operational billets. Now, how to compare a Marine that's in school? How does he work into that bill? So I think we're going to have to do a separate profile, or either don't even grade them specifically, with the boxes. Maybe just use a word picture and have certain categories or certain traits that have to be addressed with that word picture, and then maybe a ranking piece. So we've got to develop that by next summer and provide the guidance out to the officers that will have to make those evaluations. So that's where we're heading. So we will have, right now, the academic fitness report is sort of seen as a that doesn't count for much. What the Commandant wants is to develop a way where it will count for something in a fair way. The other thing that I'd mention is that we have a Marine Corps doctrinal publication. Those are our doctrinal level MCDP, Marine Corps doctrinal pubs. One on learning. It's in draft now. It's working its way up to the Commandant. And I think that was actually mentioned in the CPG as well. But it is up. It is moving up the chain, and that is the purpose behind that, of course, is to help strengthen and develop a culture of learning and expectation in the Marine Corps, and to sort of codify it in doctrine. So that's where we are.
Well, thank you. So for Admiral Buck, it's a little different because obviously you're building and you're an accession source, but it was already alluded to that for years our training fitness reports were attended course XYZ, and if you had too many of those, that was actually a negative. So I was just wondering, from your perspective, how do you see getting credit for the work and the contribution from the Naval Academy perspective?
If I may, I have two aspects of my response to you. One is from a big Navy out in the fleet perspective, fairly brief, and then I'll go back to what we're doing at the Naval Academy. For about the last year and a half, maybe even up to 2 years, the Navy has embarked on a complete rewrite of the Naval Officer Fitness Report. They're still in work. They took a very, very deep dive into considering a 360, in which an officer's fitness report is informed by an officer's subordinates, peers, and superiors. And they've not reported out yet, and they don't necessarily have an end date that they're being driven to yet. So this new element of putting in an aspect of a fitness report to talk about education and the pursuit of it, I think is going to be somewhat of an easy inject, and that group can begin to define what would the actual criteria be to grade and input into that. And then it'd be very interesting to see the perspective of the whole 360 of what they think of that naval officer's focus, commitment, and success rate in the educational space. Let me go to the Naval Academy. My predecessor, Vice Admiral Ted Carter, and his team instituted something that I think is very good at the Naval Academy. Midshipmen now, throughout their 4 years, now get a fitness report. We don't call it a fitness report, but it is an aptitude report that continues to evolve a little bit for the criteria, but they are now being conditioned during their entire 4-year journey to being evaluated, and they are evaluated in a 360 by those that they lead, their peers and their superiors. And ultimately, it plays a factor in their ultimate class standing. Their class standing, over 50% of the criteria that goes into that, to their order of merit upon graduation, is their academic performance at the Naval Academy. So they understand the importance of paying attention to their studies and succeeding at their studies. And I'm very proud and excited to tell you and to continue to tell audiences that this is the first time where we begin to get to mold and shape these young men and women and instill in them a passion for lifelong learning. So as they develop that over 4 years, as they enter the fleet, they're going to have that desire to participate in and demand from our Navy a continuum of learning throughout their career. We teach them how, and then we demand of them analytical rigor. And we hope that over the 4 years, as they dive into their respective majors, they also have a real passion for intellectual curiosity. If you mold that over 4 years, they'll take that philosophy into the fleet, and that's what they're going to demand of us as senior leaders to continue to deliver that.
Thank you. This next question is really mostly aimed at Admiral Rondeau and General Bargeron, but I'd like to know how are Marine Corps University and Naval Postgraduate School connecting with the fleet and with the fleet Marine Force in a menu of delivery modalities that fit the various needs of the communities out there, the warfighters out there. Where is that today, and where do you see opportunities for future? Because there's got to be that with lifelong learning and with career-long learning, I think there has to be this connection that's constant. But I'll start with the general on that one.
Okay, thank you. Well, today, with the exception of the Marine Corps War College and the School of Advanced Warfighting, we are offering all of our courses in distance learning modalities. They are a mixture of online, asynchronous, on-site, face-to-face sort of venues and forums. There are blended programs which mix both of those over several periods of time. We have 8 different distance sites where we execute these. That's at Quantico, of course. There's 29 Palms. There's Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton, Okinawa, Hawaii, and we have a couple of regions. So we have regional sites in Miramar, in Fort Worth, and in Pensacola. So we're spread out pretty well and offering all of those different seminars or different courses. All of the courses, again, except for SAW and Marine Corps War College. Where we're going in the future is to take what is our MarineNet, which is our distance education infrastructure now that you may have seen, MarineNet, and we're going to expand that into what we're calling an e-learning or ecosystem, learning ecosystem, and that will just expand what we're doing now, and also integrate all of the different services that we have out there to a one-stop shop, single portal sign-in that students will be able to go in and get to all of that. Right now we have all those capabilities that are there, but they're not one-stop shopping. And that's going to use, I'm going to look at my notes here, MarineNet will continue to be the digital self-study courses. Moodle and Adobe Connect, if you're familiar with those, they'll be part of that seminar collaboration. We'll have the video services that are sort of like Marine YouTube, and it'll be, sort of, God help us with that. But we have controls on there. Units will actually own and have channels on there so they can post various training that they want to provide to the rest of the fleet, in addition to more formal courses. So, and then the other thing that I was excited about is this unified learner record store that will be at the end of the process. So single, portal sign-in, access to all of the different courses and services, collaboration, video, self-studies, as well as instructor-led. And then at the end, it feeds into basically a sort of a universal transcript, learner's record stores, I'd say, so that we can keep track of that better and then help Marines get credit as we build out probably some of the agreements and arrangements we have with civilian universities, that we might be able to translate some of that into college credits. So
Just as
that's
an
sort of
aside-
where we are and where we're going.
Just as an aside to all of that tremendous, channel of opportunities or menu of channels of opportunity, are Marines feeding back that they have the space, weight, kg, and moment compensation to fit all this in their duties in the Fleet Marine Force and elsewhere? Are they getting the kind of the top cover to take advantage of this?
I think so, and I base that on the fact that everywhere I go and talk to enlisted Marines, especially since the numbers are bigger,
Yes.
they're asking for more. They're asking for more opportunities, so they're looking for places to do
Great.
that. Yeah.
Great. And Admiral Rondeau?
So a number of things. First of all, again, in the question about connecting to the fleet, we do constant curriculum reviews for all of our sponsors and our customers, our clients, and so we do that constantly. They come, they look at things, they bore down to every single course, the content, the faculty engages with them, so we have that. We have about 1,800 students on any given day in residence and about 1,000 on any given day for DL. And we have, in the DL, we also have hybrid courses. So we have hybrid courses, short courses that we're offering up to whatever the client and the customer wants. So we're doing that with the fleet in every way. We have synchronous courses and asynchronous. An example of the asynchronous courses is that our MECE faculty is up in Bangor, Washington, and we do asynchronous courses based upon the individual submariner schedule. And so we do courses based upon his or her schedule, and the faculty makes themselves available to do that. So we have that. We have the RCEP program, which puts NPS faculty on board ships. Right now, they're on the America, with the America Battle Group, and then I think that they're going to go on the Bataan group here in about 2 weeks, and we deploy faculty on board ships to teach courses. We've been doing that for quite a while, mostly out of the West Coast, but we'll do it on both sides. We also have, of course, it's interesting because when we talk about this, we not only discuss the fleet, we talk about the FMF and the Corps. So we've been working with MCU to help with cyber courses and helping to train the trainer and helping to do whatever we can to help our colleagues in the kinds of S&T courses that we have. We also have, of course, the War College has a small cadre of faculty at Monterey so that when a student they can get their JPME 1, and that helps out the fleet and the force because they can make that all happen at the same time. We also send out across the globe various kinds of training groups, and we do all kinds of work with regard to campaign analyses and those things around the globe. So we travel a lot. And I have an IT capability that supports all of that, so that we don't lose anything because you're at sea. We don't lose anything due to faculty also being around the globe. So we're working hard. It does not mean we could not get better and that we should not get better, and we always need to get better, but we're working pretty hard at staying very sensitive to our client base.
Let me ask you the same follow-on that I asked the General, which is, are you getting the feedback? Because sometimes I know in the past it wasn't always there. Are people getting the top cover to take maximum advantage of these offerings?
Very honestly, it varies. It's uneven. It all depends upon a lot of factors. There's a lot of pressure, but to the General's point, the demand signal is pretty constant and reliable from the student base. So what we can do to the point that the General makes is we also educate NCOs who are qualified. So either short courses or master's level courses. We have Marine Corps and SOF mostly, NCOs taking in residence and DL courses, and their demand signal is pretty constant, pretty even. But the signals from other places, it all depends upon factors relating to their various pressure points.
So this Naval University system that's mentioned in the report and in the SecNav's 5 February memo, it plays big. And it's really very comprehensive as it's laid out, to assemble the existing naval educational institutions, Naval Academy, NPS, MCU, and the War College. And it'll also include, which really caught my eye, academic curricula for NROTC, OCS, Federal Executive Fellows, all flagged in general officer education. It's very comprehensive. So I know it's still very early, but can we imagine an educational continuum that flows from the Naval Community College through the officer accession programs, through the graduate programs? And is there any early indicators of who's really driving that and where there's consensus on where that whole ecosystem should go? And I'll throw it first to Admiral Buck.
Well, my answer is we're way beyond imagining, we're actually executing. So I've got a real world tactical example that's in work right this moment. 5 years ago, the Naval Academy stood up its cyber operations major. And they informed of that from many different stakeholders as to what the appropriate curriculum would be for a group of students that wanted to take it on as a major over 4 years, as well as what type of number of touches do we need to give every midshipman in the brigade with regards to cyber. We have already gone out, we were informed by NPS, we were informed by Naval War College, and asked them, how should we stair-step this? What exposure should they get at the undergraduate level? Then what exposure will you give them during a postgraduate experience? And then what exposure will you continue to grow upon at the War College? And we did that. And the continuum actually exists now amongst our flagship institutions. Well, we took that a step further now. Then ROTC came in, and the whole ROTC program said, hey, Naval Academy, what did you do? What's in your cyber operations major? What are you doing? And can we have it? Yes, you may. So we gave them the whole kit and caboodle. And then we said, well, here's the training package, here's the major, here's the courses. Oh, by the way, why don't you send your professors and your instructors to the Naval Academy for 3 months and we'll teach them how we teach it. And we did that also.
That's terrific.
So we're off and running. The one place I haven't seen it is when are they going to teach guys like me, flag officers, cyber? So I'm
executive level.
I am not a cyber native. I'm definitely an immigrant. And once we get that built into flag and general officer curriculum, we'll have the entire continuum for a career-long look at education.
General, I'd ask you to jump in on that one.
Okay. So we are developing, I got a lot of tasks out of the CPGs, as you might imagine. So right now we're creating a formal continuum that would define from entry level all the way to GO. And for each, so it takes the resident courses, from the basic school for us, for officers and sort of recruit training for enlisted Marines, all the way up through general officer. And what we're in during the periods between formal education, formal courses, in what we're calling the academic white space, is define learning areas. Right now we're working on using leadership and ethics, warfighting, joint interagency and intergovernmental, regional and cultural studies, and communication studies. So settling on 4 or 5 learning areas and then defining requirements for each learning area for each rank, and then putting that in between, for instance, EWS for captains and command and staff for
Expeditionary Warfare School.
Expeditionary Warfare School.
Right.
For captains, right?
Right. No, I was just saying, I was translating.
Oh, I said EWS?
Yes, sir. I was just translating it.
Sorry, Expeditionary Warfare School. I heard that, but I said EWS. and the next level. And so defining requirements, structured requirements, some of it would be led by commanding officers out there, some, proctored sort of by it. Some would be go on MarineNet or the e-learning ecosystem and do these things for each rank. So to fill it in all the way through a geo level piece. Right now, our geo level piece is, here are some courses the Commandant expects you to go to, a couple of these a year, or two per year. And, but there's no real tracking of it. So this would incorporate learning areas for 1 through 4 stars as well, 3 stars actually, in the same sort of framework where there would be requirements to hit and that we would track them in our learning ecosystem. What we're struggling with now is, yes, we can do that. We've actually put it together. Our infrastructure, IT, ET infrastructure will handle it. We could expand to it. What will it be required for promotion? Will it be required for the entry into the next formal program, resident PME program? What will be the requirement? What is realistic? What will the market bear, so to speak? So that's what we're working on right now, and sort of the questions that we're wrestling with.
Thanks. I'd ask Admiral Rondeau to take this on with an extra twist.
Yeah.
We've talked over the years about how in the Navy of the past, there was almost an anti-intellectual bias. And if you went out as a naval officer and got a master's degree, the team would accept you back.
Yeah.
But maybe if you got a PhD, and the only one I'll ever get is my initials, but it made you suspect. People were like, wow, you might be overeducated. So the same question, but in this vein of, are we making the change in how we view this? Are we embracing education in a way that maybe we didn't in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question, Pete. And so let me take a little bit different tact than your initial. First of all, there is no time like right now. If we don't do this now, we will have missed an extraordinary strategic inflection point. What I can tell you is that from my experience, the dialogue going on with the leadership, and including Admiral Chatfield at the War College, has been rich, it's been honest, it's been forthright, and it's been really good. And so the dialogue amongst us has been good. The CLO is asking some hard questions. That's a good thing, because a hard question will sharpen your edges. So this moment is about us, but there are a number of things. Sean's point, the Admiral's point about what does he know as in cyber and as a digital immigrant is really important, because the expectation is that senior officers may not be the masters, but they need to ask good questions. So being able to help the senior leaders to be able to do that, because leaders lead tone, leaders lead culture, and be able to have leaders who are senior be able to at least ask decent questions of these really smart young officers and NCOs who know the answer. This thing gets to your question. At the moment, I think that there is a view, and it's in higher ed around the country, that learning and education are going to be a different breed of cat. And if we go for the end point, the PhD, the master's, whatever it might be, that's not going to get there. It's how are you having the conversation intelligently every day in a very diverse culture. Everybody can come to the table and have a critical kind of a conversation. That requires some education, but it requires a different kind of dialogue that senior officers and leaders and commanders and colonels and captains need to also inculcate, so that you don't have that bias of, you went off to go to school, gosh, maybe we will still like you when you come back, maybe we won't. And all of a sudden there's an antibody to that. That, I think, is changing because of the demand signals from our folks. They want to learn. They want to be. So what's happened out in the fleet, the Navy? We have now Chief Petty Officers saying, I'm tired of technicians and coming on board my ship and doing something that I should be able to do. Teach me to do it, teach my folks to do it, because when we go to war, they're off the ship anyway. We want to get back into our own competence and our mastery of our science and our profession of arms. That demand signal will normalize and equalize this bias about education. So I think we are at that point with the unders and the SecNav's guidance, with the CNO, the extraordinary guidance out of the CPG, with these leaders talking. I think that we're at a point that is a strategically important point, and I think that this cognitive age changes the conversation about what you're learning and when you went to go do it.
Thank you.
There's an important point here that we should make, is that we have a Department of Defense, we have military forces for one reason, and that is to produce combat readiness and put combat ready forces in the field and in the defense of our nation. There's an important balance between education and training and operational experience, because all of those contribute to combat readiness. And so, we, as the educators, as the folks that are trying to lead education forward, we also have to understand and respect the needs of the operators and the need for that operational experience, because it all works together. And so we have to remind ourselves occasionally what we're doing at the end of the day.
I want to add on to that a bit. So cyber, let's take cyber, and to the admirals and the general's point. Cyber as an objective, interesting topic is an objective and interesting topic.
Right.
But I will tell you is that we teach cyber at NPS, but we're also teaching cyber inside ocean science, inside systems engineering, inside acquisition, inside anything, inside OR. So how does cyber affect the warfighter? How does cyber affect your ability to understand things in your world, so that when you go back, whether or not you majored in cyber or not, you got some exposure to how cyber will affect everything else that you're doing. The same thing with data and analytics, data science. That is part of our world now. And it is, and our people demand that, and they need it for the smaller sizing of ships and everything else. So this is now happening, and we see that, I think.
No, that's excellent.
In my 40 years of this career, I've never seen such a commitment and focus on it. So Admiral Rondeau is correct. We're at an inflection point. We either jump on this right now and continue to sustain the momentum, or we're going to lose a strategic opportunity.
Here's another piece to it, that is the manpower management piece.
Yeah.
Because my experience has been, it's not because, at least in the Marine Corps, and I venture to say it's true for the Navy, it is not necessarily that the communities of interest or that the operating forces have a bias against education. It is because it is the balance, the timing. My experience was I went to the Naval Postgraduate School at a time for an infantry officer. It should have been not good for me. But it was because the timing worked out and I didn't miss a key billet. Mm-hmm. That was just blind luck on my part. But today we have monitors and detailers that could be managing that more closely and could be getting this extra educational opportunities in there and making sure you stay operationally relevant. That's not easy. And that requires some coordination between the educational and training communities and the manpower communities that doesn't necessarily exist right now, or it should, at least in the Marine Corps.
So that's a good segue for one of the questions I had on my list, which is, how do our institutions adapt to a less tribalized and more unified culture that optimizes what makes each of our educational institutions distinct and yet leverages common purpose? And I was just curious, listening both to the first panel and this conversation, it seems to me that you've got to get the warfare communities and the different warfare communities within the Marine Corps and the Navy to adapt what they're doing for progression. Just as the General said, you could do something that's good for education and be a lethal injection to an infantry officer or to an aviator who you took out of the cockpit at the wrong time. So is there right now, I'm assuming, but please fill me in and fill us in, is there a good discussion right now with the different communities about how to deliver this and make it part of the fabric of the career progression? And I'll start with Admiral Buck.
Well, I'll flip my aspects of my answer from my previous one. I'll start in the Naval Academy. Yes, it is, and as we kind of instill a desire, passion, and demand signal for lifelong learning, producing generalists, our goal is to produce generalists at the Naval Academy so that that young woman or that young man can matriculate in the Marine Corps or the Navy into any particular warfighting community. We don't want them to completely commit and focus to something so early on. They need to be able to assess where the Navy or the Marine Corps needs them. We have representatives from all of those tribes at the Naval Academy.
Sure do.
They all are coalescing under that concept of a generalist that we want to commission, and they begin to see that. They're senior enough to where they still communicate back out to the fleet, to all of their friends, buddies, shipmates, and can begin to see the focus of this commitment from our Navy. And I think it starts with us. I think it starts with the leaderships of the flagship institutions, the focus on education, talking about coming to panels like this and beginning to ask all of you all to help us advertise this as how important it is as a weapon enabler, and to keep the momentum going. So we'll do our part. I'm sure the other institutions here are going to do their part.
But you just called it a weapon or warfighting, if I could, enabler.
Absolutely.
But that's exactly the change I think I'm trying to pin down here, is that it used to be people saw this as a tax almost, not an enabler, but as a tax. Like, I guess I have to send this person off to school. So that change, and starting at the beginning, I think is really.
So SECNAV just published his new priorities.
Right.
And number 2 is education as a strategic weapon enabler.
Right.
And that's pretty damn important, because I think it had 8 or 9 priorities on this strategic document. Number 2 was education.
Mm-hmm. Admiral Rondeau.
So you asked about tribes, and to a certain degree, tribes are okay because they keep the force diverse, and everybody asks questions about each other. I do think there's a deeper question that is going to have to work through in terms of the warfighter sponsors. That is, what do you really want in all this? So, I've got Rick Easton and John Hammer in the audience here, and these are both Aegis guys, right? And they both ask really hard questions all the time. But one of the questions that always comes up in, let's say, surface warfare, air warfare, name that tune, is what do you really want your folks to know, and how do you want them to know it? So assignment into education with a view towards the end state in mind. So if we could have more, and again, this is a nod to one piece of this, but where are we on air defense? And how do we educate that through systems engineering or through some other kind of place? And thoughtfulness about what does the education mean, rather than saying it's off the rail, bring it back on the rail and match it up to what the warfighting needs are. That's a really hard thing to do, but I think it's worthy work, and everybody needs to be able to do that and match up those competencies to that need, but not forget what Admiral Buck has said. So you used the term generalist, and I would say one more thought on this is, we sometimes create arguments that don't need to happen. So the big binary argument is, do we teach critical thinking or S&T, right? So which one matters? Which one's the uber focus of the year? And I would tell you is that if there is a scientist or a technologist who's not asked why or how to solve a problem or how to find solutions, then they're not doing their job. And so I think that critical thinking is about how do we ask questions of each other. It gets back to Admiral Buck's issues, and I know that this is deep to the Marine Corps. How do you ask questions? And you can't ask them if you're not somewhat able to do that. But critical thinking is part of philosophy, it's part of mathematics, it's part of science and technology, it's part of living. And we just need to have a mindset that says we're going to ask intelligent questions and be educated in those kinds of questions to be able to solve problems and find solutions and create cool stuff.
General, I'll give you a crack at that one.
Yes. So the conversation is certainly occurring within the Marine Corps, but it's occurring along the lines of, what do the different tribes do and what are they pointed toward? The Commandant pointed us toward increasing naval integration, naval expeditionary operations, in support of the fleet commanders. So there is a signpost or an aim point for you to aim at when you're talking about refining and promoting our education. It should be pointed toward that within each of your tribes.
Do you think there's an opportunity here to do a twofer? You've got the E4S objectives, but with the Commandant's planning guidance, which has come up a couple times in the program today, do you think that this is also a chance to get at integrated naval warfare objectives that the Commandant espoused, and I think CNO's on board with? There's a chance when you're doing this to get that done too.
Certainly. I mean, I don't see why they would be mutually exclusive at all, or not being able to be integrated. I think, though, that another piece of the Commandant's guidance was we need to know what the fleet commanders want us to do. In some ways, we are in support of the fleet commanders. That's what the Commandant wants us to be. We want to go back to our naval expeditionary, roots. But we need to kind of know, is what we're doing, what was espoused in the Commandant's planning guidance, is that what fleet commanders want? And so we'll work on that, and we certainly are. I'd like to make a point about, tribes and culture. Together we have a culture that prioritizes, I think, forward deployed combat readiness. That can't change. That's our DNA together, I think. And so as we make some of these fundamental changes, and I think great changes, we have to preserve that DNA. We have to preserve that idea that at the end of the day, as Admiral Rondeau said, what are we pointing at? We're pointing at forward deployed combat readiness. And so I think what we can do in our culture, though, a bit, as has been intimated, I think, that culture needs to begin to see education as more of a primary contributor to combat readiness. We typically talk about combat readiness being a product of people, equipment, and training. It should be people, equipment, training, and education. So what we can do, I think, the basic culture cannot change, but the way our culture views education and its contribution to combat readiness, it ought to be sort of an equal pillar. And I think that's where we're sort of headed. Yeah.
Thank you. I thought it'd be a good time now to transition and open it up to audience questions. A couple of ground rules, please. Please use the mic so that everybody can hear you. Please ask a question, and please ask one question. So tell us who you are. So open it up to people at the mics.
Hi, Mike Mann. I'm a retired SWO, and I'm still struggling with the problem statement. CNO Richardson said many times it's the highest quality sailors he's ever seen since he's forever. Admiral Buck, I've heard you talk about the quality of the midshipmen, the brigade of midshipmen, the highest quality ever. I listen to what you all are doing in the educational side of the house, and I think it's phenomenal. I'm not sure what problem we're solving in the education side of the house. Flip this over, there still is only 20 years in a career, or 30 years in a career. And the tension between operational warfighting readiness and education, I think, is really the challenge we're facing today. And we do have chiefs out there. They're not technically capable. And we have SWOs out there that are not operationally capable, as we witnessed a couple years ago. I'm not seeing a solution to that problem, the warfighting problem.
So
or an addressal of the warfighting problem.
I'll take a
Did
crack
we
at
get
it.
enough of, okay.
So, Mike, you talk about that tension between being operationally ready, a lot of reps and sets, a lot of training over where do you fit in educational opportunities. Admiral Rondeau talked about moving into the cognitive age. That's upon us. And our adversaries are going to be able to outthink us, outmaneuver us by getting inside our OODA loop. I think the problem statement is how do we coalesce the educational opportunities that we have now that are out there and make a commitment to relieve that tension. There needs to be a cultural change and make a commitment that education is a weapon enabler. I would suggest the two most powerful weapon systems in the United States military is the human brain inside every one of our service members, and the second most powerful weapon system in the U.S. military arsenal is an all-volunteer force. And so you take that, and if that's the most important weapon system, then develop it, nurture it, evolve it, modernize it, make it better and better every year, and we got to do it faster than our adversaries, or we're going to get outmaneuvered, outthought. So this critical thinking, the ability to innovate and think outside the box, that comes from an educational experience, not a training experience. Now, I'm not walking away from training because reps and sets makes you very, very good at what you do. But the reps and sets, the training's got to be on top of a strong educational foundation. So it's a commitment. It's as simple as that. And under Modely talked about it, it's a prioritization. That's all it is. Somebody brought up in that previous panel, money. We're always worried about money. We're prioritizing money. Where are we going to put our money where our mouth is? And moving into the cognitive age, education now needs to be a much more important weapon system. My take on it.
So, Mike, what's changed a little bit is, and we all are, you've heard it from us, first of all, the speed, the physics of decision making, mass, speed, volume has just gotten a lot more compressed. So the individual warfighter is now has an impact beyond anything in the past. So there is something to be said about what are we doing, and with indulgence from my friends and colleagues in the N1 community, because they have hard work to do. But how we're doing P codes versus AQD versus education, how we channel part of the problem that you have identified on time is how we have a legacy personnel and manpower system that does not really accommodate different kinds of modalities of learning and that kind of thing. So I think there are a lot of people trying to come together, and we're at a battleship moment. I mean, we're at a battleship moment. And so I think it's important to recognize that and figure out this has been going on for many years. So Christine Fox at Admiral Mullen's requirement, I was the DNS, said I want you to look at education in the Navy, and the focus of that 2008 report was on manpower and how we're doing the bureaucracy of manpower. There's a lot of other things to it. We've been doing this over and over and over again. Coming together has not happened very much in the past. So this thing with the CLO and the NEE, that allows us to across the board from that associate up to PhD and all of the training and education that comes to warfighter enablement. That's all part of this. And I would tell you that we got to do it because we're losing ground. We are not leading in cyber. We are not leading in data analytics. We're not leading in data science. We are behind. Our competitors who are smart are ahead of us. We are not in good shape in those areas, and it starts here.
Yeah, I would say that in terms of what's the problem statement, it's not that the education system per se is got something wrong with it. I think that what's the problem that we're trying to address is that this combination of great power competition, disruptive technology, and sort of the accelerated pace of change that we're seeing in every domain, and not just cyber, every domain of our operating environment. So great power competition, disruptive technology, accelerated rate of change is just sort of making it harder to keep our comparative advantage. That's the problem statement. And to the extent that education can help us maintain our competitive advantage, that's what we're driving at. And so some guidance that we've given our faculty this year was that we're not, because of this, we have a special responsibility to help the young men and women that we're sending in harm's way tomorrow. We have to help them stay ahead of this change. We have to better educate them. And the faculty, the educators today can't just provide quality education now. They have to anticipate and articulate and respond to change in a meaningful way from an educational perspective. So that's how we've sort of defined the problem statement.
So if you read the CPG, the Commandant puts a number of pages under training and education, but all before that, he talks about the capacity of the individual Marine. The CPG is an extraordinary statement about the educated Marine. And so it really is, so we have warfighters who are saying we got to do something different. And this gets really sophisticated. So very, very quickly, if I might, when I made a call on 10th Fleet, Admiral White, brilliant guy. One of the things that he said is, you know, I like to have about every 2 years a PhD in anthropology. I'm saying, really? He said, yeah, I like to have a number of people in uniform who have been warfighters, who are majoring in cultural anthropology. And I said, why is that? He said, because cultural anthropology will get you to the notion of meaning, and meaning is important in cyber. Now that's an intellectual journey that I had not thought about, oh, by the way. And so that's kind of the complexity of this. Is you have the head of Navy Cybercom saying, I want some PhDs who are warfighters who are wearing warfighter pins to know cultural anthropology so that through cyber they can help us to understand what the competitor means. That's pretty sophisticated stuff.
Okay, I think we've see what you did, Mike. I'd like to offer a question over here, sir.
Thank you. I'm Mike Collins. I'm a retired Navy commander. I work at the Department of Veterans Affairs in the policy shop, and I'm finishing a one-year fellowship on Capitol Hill. Admiral Rondeau, I was very much interested in the discussion of where you are. I went to the Naval Postgraduate School, graduated in '91, and most of my peers and I never got to really use our utilization tours. So in that context, what good is the education if the Navy doesn't use it while it's still fresh?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is a constant conversation. Whenever we get the curriculum reviews with our sponsors, we ask that, and they ask it of us. It's gotten better. We're not there yet, but for NPS, we'll tell you that the utilization tour, and it's on the banner, by the way, that it's a lifetime. It's a career-long thing because of what we're teaching. But I get the question. It's a pertinent question. Again, better, but AQDs versus P codes will put you in a different direction on some of these things. So if we detail by a P code versus we detail by an AQD, which is again my friends over in N1, we need to figure out how we do that better. But that's a fit from the warfighters and the community sponsors. We'll educate, but how they classify after that is a manpower issue. But we're talking about it a lot. It's a pertinent question.
Thank you.
For our non-naval people, a P code is a code you get that's associated with your postgraduate education, and an AQD is your additional qualification designator. You may have expertise in an area, so you may have a graduate degree and then have experience that earns you an additional qualifier in your record. And sometimes people are actually detailed in accordance with those. Sometimes not. Yeah. Okay, over here, sir.
Hey, good morning to everyone. And I'm Fleet Master Chief Rick O'Rourke over at U.S. Fleet Forces Command. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask a couple questions too, actually. So just for the panel, I think that, a statement would be that this is moving really fast, right? February, SecNav signs out a document, and we're here today, and I appreciate all the hard work that's happened just so quickly. How do you envision the Naval Community College rollout impacting enlisted NCO advancement, and then the friction between that education and technical competency in their career field, as the general spoke of? And then just an add-on to that would be, do you envision in the profession of arms at some point the addition of continuing education units throughout a lifelong career of learning?
Well,
Did you say CE, continuing education unit?
Yes,
So-
sir.
So that's exactly what we're trying to incorporate in our continuum, and that's how we would sort of help track that.
And so the other part of that question was, sir, how do you see or foresee or envision the rollout of the community,
Yeah.
the Naval Community College, impacting the careers of the NCOs or enlisted? Is that going to be something that is on their career path, and they have to have certain levels of education in order to get to certain pay grades? And then do you foresee friction between that education and their technical training for their MOS or their rating?
I'll finish off my part from the Marine Corps perspective. Certainly there's going to be tension and friction, and we've talked about it before, and it will have to be managed. What is a requirement and what is just an enhancement to your career? And so those are the questions we're struggling with. But the Naval Community College would do nothing but help the Marine Corps in providing broadened opportunities, more and more opportunities, and sort of the learning ecosystem that we're rolling out and that we already have with the MarineNet. That it's just a natural extension of that. It just provides more opportunities. So we're excited about that. But we will always have to manage is it a requirement or is it just an enhancement? You know, and so.
Fleet, you know we've been there before. Our memories serve us both very well. On a previous MCPON's tour, I believe, my memory serves that if you wanted to become a senior chief or a master chief, you had to have an advanced degree. I think that lasted for a while, and then that policy, that requirement was removed because we either didn't manage it well or it was unachievable. I love the words the general just used. Is it a requirement or an enhancement? I like that thought. I think I'm going to be down more of the road of an enhancement. My educational opportunities have always enhanced my ability to lead and manage and make decisions and helped with my critical thinking. When I sit on a board at the Bureau for officer promotions or officer selections to different boards, we do go up and we look at the advanced education credentials of an officer, master's degree. Every once in a while we'll see a commissioned officer with a PhD. But through years and years of board experience, I have never seen a single board member hold that against an officer as a requirement for promotion. They looked more at their technical competence. I think Secretary Moodley said it best on the first panel. He said, we demand both technical competence and social competence. You got to have yes and yes. So I would go to what the general just said. It needs to be an enhancement coming out of that educational opportunity in a community college.
So you're not, none of you are the actual Naval Community College implementers, but maybe Admiral Rondeau, you could tell us where's that discussion right now on this very point?
So there are a couple of things. First of all, as you heard from CLO, there'll be a new president and a provost coming in, and when he's leaving, and we all should leave, that person the ability to maneuver within the space. A couple of reference points, though. As being the president of the largest community college in the Midwest and one of the largest in the country, the average, this is a national data point, the average community college student takes 9 years to get an associate's. Okay? Part of that is because lack of focus. So I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this, I want to do that, and nobody's guiding. So there's a national movement called Guided Pathways to try to get community college students to focus on an area and get it done. Same thing happens at least in the Navy. How many sailors have I seen in front of me who are majoring in law enforcement. Now, if you are an MA or a Marine, maybe that makes some sense. But if you're working in a high field of science and technology, why would you do that? So what the community college will do is not only give courses in social skills and reading and writing, which is important for growing up in any profession, doing whatever you're doing to get advanced to anything. But also, if they can get some math or engineering or science that will apply, or cyber communications, whatever it might be, that will apply to their warfare area or the warfare enabling area, that's good for the Navy, the Corps, and it's good for the human being, because then he or she can go on and get a bachelor's, master's, and that continuum continues. But for us to, and then they'll have a choice. If they want to major in clarinet, that's great. They probably will not take the NCC course. If they want to major in the mathematics of acoustics, then they're going to be able to do that through basic work in the NCC course. So I think that it's goodness. And I think that there's a continuity there. And we help the junior enlisted to focus on this thing so that he or she will be able to advance no matter where they're going. There's goodness to that. And the last thing, the NCC will allow every sailor to know that he or she's a learner. This is huge, and it's huge. This is what A School does. I mean, it teaches sailors that they can learn, and that they can learn new cool stuff, and there's goodness to that in the entire force.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Thanks. I'm going to come at the what's the purpose question from a slightly different angle. I am convinced that we have an imperative, and you are outlining the content imperative that we need. We need cyber, we need agility, we need sharpen the stick, we need acoustics, we need advanced degrees. All that's all true. But if we are attempting to fix the sharpness of our warfighting ability for all of our folks, it seems that we aren't addressing one of the really critical issues, which is velocity and volume. You know, we graduate 1,000 plus or minus midshipmen. You have 1,500 resident students. I couldn't look up and find out how many folks attended Marine Corps University, so I couldn't get that stat. We have 52,000 officers in the Navy. We're not penetrating enough, and that seems to suggest, and my question is, velocity. So what is the effort that you can make to scale these efforts, and doesn't that put the definition of training versus education more like an arm wrestling match, and that isn't really the distinction. What we need to focus on isn't the focus more on the volume of education we can get into the fleet and not so much the topics that we all probably agree on?
Well,
I think it matters at what level we're talking about. At the training level and even at the education level, at the more junior ranks, I think volume is probably more important, making it more available to more. When you start thinking more senior, perhaps it needs to be more directed, more narrow and more rigorous in certain areas that we ought to decide on, and more selective for those who get to participate in it.
So not every stick needs to be sharp? Is that how that, and I'll back off, but that seems like every officer, every enlisted person needs to still be sharp. And I'll back off. I don't want to make this a debate, so I apologize for that.
I don't disagree with it. They need to be sharp. But what it requires to make them sharp to do what they need to do is not the same as it required for a senior strategist at the 06 or 07 level. Not the same thing.
I think the aspect of velocity of your question was addressed in the first panel a little bit too. We have a good session source foundational education at my level for the officer corps. And we also have advanced war colleges where we catch them later, and we kind of got that mushy middle. And I think you change the velocity by delivering more of a continuum at younger ages in the career path. That's how I would increase the velocity. And I think the CLO is already over that. We know that we have that middle gap. Let's increase the velocity younger in a career path. Then you're going to get the tension of opportunity, time. The time, that's the best question of the day, is the precious resource of time between education, training, reps and sets, and being a lethal warfighter.
Okay. I'll keep over here because the queue was longer on this side of the room. Sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Randy Papadopoulos, and I'm a historian, the Secretary Historian for the Department of the Navy. And I took 8 years to get my PhD at George Washington because I learned German in the process. But a question here that I think will maybe sharpen this, and at least I hope it will, is it helpful to consider a superior's recommendation that somebody go for more education as a leadership question? In essence, I'm thinking of somebody, a junior officer, or maybe a staff NCO, who looks at somebody and says, you should go to the Naval Academy. And I'm thinking that that's the metaphor that we want to extend throughout a career. In other words, that we want superiors to recommend people for education throughout their careers. In other words, to select the people that really need the education and specific types of education. Thank you.
I'd like to take that on. You heard a mention of Sailor 2025. That is an N1 initiative that's been ongoing for a number of years. And an aspect of Sailor 2025 in the development is maybe the military might move away from being an up or out company. You either promote up or you're asked to leave the service. The pyramid gets very narrow at the top. We're beginning to realize that we may be losing a lot of talent that way. And why can't a young man or young woman that becomes an old man and an old woman, but with great technical skills, be able to serve for much longer than they do now, even though they don't promote? So the educational opportunities, if we move that way and we're not up and out anymore, you can either take a technical track and become the best technician in the world, or you can take a leadership track if you choose to want to be a leader, manager of the organization. And I think recommendations, identification of commanding officers of their sailors or their Marines, they know their talent the best. They make a recommendation for further educational opportunities, but it must be tailored, so that we don't waste the opportunity, but we make them better and we keep them longer and our military prospers.
Yeah, one of the things that's going to change a lot of things is the blended retirement system. So those kinds of incentives are pretty important.
We've only got time for one more question, and if I've assessed this correctly, this gentleman has been waiting the longest, so I'm going to give him the last word.
Thank you. So Frank Gertner, I retired from the Navy last year. I'm an alumni of actually all three of our Navy Academy colleges and universities. And now I work at the University of Maryland. And if there's one thing I've learned this last year, it's that the future American community looks a lot different than the folks that I was educated with. And the majority, myself included, in this room would be a minority in any one of our classrooms. And so my question, and yet that is the community that is going to be determining when we fight, why we fight, and if we are resourced to fight. And so my question is, how do we ensure that the future of Navy education is also not just educating ourselves on how we fight, but also educating the broader American populace on what we will need to fight?
That's a pretty, you almost are taking us out of our swim lane there.
Just a little bit higher.
I would suggest that how we do that is that we lead by example. And we know that all of our Marines and sailors were eventually going to matriculate and absorb back into society. And what they can do is they can take what opportunity they were given and the education they gained in their military service and take that back to their communities, use it as they lead in industry or lead in government. But maybe as a company, as an institution, the U.S. military, we can lead by example and show our commitment to education, and maybe that will percolate through the rest of society. But that's kind of out of our swim lane.
It certainly is a bit, but we owe it to the American public, which I think you're sort of pointing at, to educate them on what we do for the country. I mean, in the Marine Corps, as you know, we have a very famous propaganda machine. So, but I think we all have a responsibility as American people to educate them on their Marine Corps, on their Navy.
And we're constantly doing that.
And we do expend a fair amount of effort doing that, yes.
Yeah.
Admiral Rondeau, do you have a point on that?
Yeah, you know, the United States Navy and the military have set forth many times changes in society. So the Navy back in the early 20th century started A schools and trade schools for sailors who didn't have anything but maybe elementary education, and we upped the ante. After World War II, and so many GIs, former GIs, went to college, and we upped the game there. Nuclear engineering. We wouldn't be as far as we are in the world without the nuclear navy. So the challenge you put before us is actually pretty important. This group, and the under said it today, is you're an investment in us today. This is our investment in you, because we're 3 up here, 4 with Naval War College. We're 4 of us. And we're doing our job, and we're executing like anybody else is executing to the operational requirements. But you are out there in a network and can help this, because we have a role to play. We have a role to play. But this morning is about you, because our investment in you helps us to do what you want us to do. And so it's an important question, but if we don't lead this conversation nationally, who does? If not us, who? And in that, I think that this is about you all. How do you challenge us to do exactly as you're saying? But that diverse America still wants to be educated. They still want to be competent. They still want to do their jobs. They want to advance and promote, because the act of learning is a noble act, and it dignifies us as human beings. We need to go out there, but you need to help us, in my view. So yeah, you're right, but we all have that job.
Thank you. I'm going to take a page out of Christine Fox's playbook and ask you each just if there's a closing point that you'd like to make on the topic. Just a quick hitter on what's important that is still on the table, or that you think we should leave here today with. I'll start with Admiral Buck.
Commitment. Commitment, and put our money and our resources where our mouth is and stick to it. And it can't just be this discussion, it has to be action. And I'm very confident there's a whole bunch of people being put into place right now. Write a plan, have a strategy, then execute the plan.
Yep.
But that's through commitment.
General.
Yes, sir. With that, I would say make choices. I'm reminded there are so many different ways, different methodologies, different programs, different policies, so many different models that we could use to get after the goals, educational goals, that we need to make some choices. The essence of bad strategy is a failure to choose. Paralysis by analysis. We need to, some things just need to get an 80% solution and move out. And there are a couple on the table that we probably ought to attack now. So that would be my final thought.
Well, this is going to be a trio, because I'm going to say to deliver, so we're kind of a doo-wop team here, but we want to deliver. And so that requires structure, that requires that our bosses help us to deliver, and that we then deliver for everybody else. Deliver.
Well, we thank you. And from a Naval Institute perspective, of course, we're an open forum. We're about the free exchange of ideas. And I hope, and we still have the CLO here who's been kind enough to stay. I hope the strategy also includes an open environment for the exchange of ideas as a vital component of this whole effort. But on the part of the Naval Institute, we want to thank you all for being here today, and thank our excellent panel. This has been terrific, a great discussion, and we know your time is precious, so let's give our panel a big hand. Thank you. Thank you very much.